Hello, and welcome to the Heathen Trans Girl podcast with me, your host, Kaya Faulkes. In today's episode, I'm going to be exploring all of the possible attestations that I could find concerning Valkyries in the lore and the primary sources. Now, in these sources, we see the Valkyries depicted kind of as a mythic being, but it's possible to interpret it as almost a role of sorts. We see them in connection with Odin, with choosing the battle slain in one specific instance of weaving a tapestry and singing in order to determine the outcome of a specific battle. We also see them as the daughters of kings and lovers of mortal heroes. And in those same instances, we see them also riding over the air and over the sea and defending those heroes that they love. These lore episodes that I'm doing basically stemmed from this desire as I've been doing all my research into Norse heathenry. So many of my books and sources have like 10,000 different bookmarks in them, each with like a little name describing what the specific reference is to. So when I'm doing research, I constantly have 3 or 4 different books open. I'm cross-referencing. I'm trying to find all these different attestations. So these lore episodes were born from the desire to compile that all into one place. So as I said earlier, this episode and these lore episodes in general hopefully will contain every possible attestation in one place of specific deities, beings, or topics. So I hope they can be of use to you as either a reference or just some fun passive listening to remind you of the different attestations that you might have forgotten, or like just putting them all in the same place and making connections across the different attestations. That said, in this episode, I have divided a lot of the attestations topically, so putting them categorically together. And if I ever make a mistake or forget something, I will try to come back and edit either the show itself, the show notes, or mention it in a follow-up episode. Which reminds me, in a couple of the previous episodes, I think it was the Egger and Ron episode and the Njord episode, I was giving the chapter numbers for Brodeur's translation of the Prose Edda, and I alternately gave the Larrington chapter numbers, but that is not a thing that exists. Larrington did not do, as far as I know, a translation of the Prose Edda. What I was referring to there was the Faulkes chapter numbers. So the chapter numbers in the Prose Edda as translated by Anthony Faulkes. All sources for this episode are public domain, and where they are not, I have acquired permission from the translators and or publishers to use these works in brief. So with that, a huge thank you to Professor Carolyne Larrington for allowing me to use small portions of her translation of the Poetic Edda, as well as a massive thank you to Alison Finlay for allowing permission for me to use the Finlay and Faulkes 2011 translation of Heimskringla. Other sources used in this episode are the Poetic Edda as translated by Henry Adams Bellows, 1936, the Prose Edda translated by Arthur Gilchrist Brodeur, 1916, Eiríksmál, Hrafnsmál, translated by Robert Fulk in 2012, as well as Volsunga Saga, translated by Morrison Magnusson in 1870. All sources and attestations will be typed up in the show notes or the description if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube. But with that, let's proceed with the episode. I think we have 22 different attestations to work through. The document that I have compiled for this episode is about 40 pages long. So this is probably going to be a pretty long episode. If you have a drink, want to settle in, go right ahead. I've got a big thermos of coffee. Let's get started. Part 1, Names. I wanted to begin by reading off a lot of the different translations of the Valkyries' names, because the names themselves, or the meanings rather, are so evocative of, I guess you might say, like the energy of the Valkyries in general. So first, Valkyrie itself usually translates to chooser of the fallen slain, or chooser of the battle slain. In Old Norse, Valkyrja is the singular and Valkyriur is the plural. I use those names in my personal practice, but in this episode I will just stick with Valkyrie for ease of flow. So with that, let's begin a list of all the Valkyrie names. Battle armor, mercy, battle spear, spearvor, spear flinger, the one charging forth with the spear, spear bearer, noisy battle, wand wielder, battle, fetter of the army, one who devastates, swan white, battle, helmet clatterer, all-wise strange creature, the female sword warrior, noise, the shaking one, pricker, the curly one, mist, Aelrune, shield destroyer, council truce, daughter of the gods, sleet and storm, very violent and very cruel, inciter to victory, victory rune, sword time, axe age, shaker, debt, vibrating noise, changeable, silence, fight, strength. I'm going to let that hang in the air for a second. That's a lot of energy. If I had a group of friends and all of their names meant things like that, I feel like that would be a bit of an intimidating bunch. That might just be me. We now have a bit of the vibe of the Valkyries. And before we move into the attestations, just a quick invitation as we're reading through to identify themes and avoid labels and categorization. Also allowing for differences through various regions and various times through these sources. Also allowing for poetic meaning and non-literal meanings. In Voluspa, stanza 30, Poetic Edda Bellows translation, we see the Valkyries ready to ride. On all sides saw I Valkyries assemble, ready to ride to the ranks of the gods. Skuld bore the shield, and Skogul rode next. Guth, Hild, Gondel, and Gerskogul. Of Herion's maidens the list have ye heard, Valkyries ready to ride o'er the earth. This next attestation I have included because there's kind of like a popular thing of connecting Freyja with the Valkyries, sometimes saying she is Queen of the Valkyries. This is one of the only, I think there might be like one other in the Prose Edda, but Grimnismál, stanza 14, Poetic Edda, Bellows translation, has a connection between Valkyrie and the slain, but not necessarily making a whole Queen of the Valkyries connection. So 14, the 9th is Folkvang, where Freyja decrees who shall have seats in the hall. Half the dead, Old Norse, Val, each day she chooses, and half does Odin have. So here we see a connection between Freyja choosing the slain, and then Odin also choosing the slain. Valkyries, their name meaning choosers of the slain, obviously ties into all this, but I think it's a wee bit of a stretch to say that Freyja has charge over all the Valkyries, or as Queen of the Valkyries, especially as we move into this next section, which is a collection of attestations concerning Odin and the Valkyries. Nafnaþulur, stanza 26, Prose Brodeur translation. Odin's Maidens. And these others are Odin's maidens, Hildr and Gondul, Lok, Mist, Skogul. Then there are Hrund and Eir, Rist and Skuld listed. In this we clearly see the Valkyries being listed as Odin's maidens. We also have mention of Eir, who is in another attestation listed among the Asenjor. And we have the inclusion of Skuld in the Valkyries. And Skuld is also attested as being one of the Norns. So connections to the Asenjor and the Norns. Yeah, leave it there. Next we have Grimnismal, 36, Poetic Edda Bellows translation. Bring a horn. This is Odin speaking in his guise as Grimir. Rist and Mist, bring the horn at my will. Skegjold and Skogul, Hild and Thrud, Lok and Herfjotur, Gol and Gerinul, Randgríð and Rathgríð and Regenleaf. Beer to the warriors bring. Jumping to the Prose Edda, Gylfaginning, chapter 36, Brodeur translation. We have a little bit of an extended passage of what we just read. So, of the Valkyries, there are also those whose office it is to serve in Valhall, to bear drink and mind the table service and ale flagons. Thus they are named in Grimnismal. Rist and Mist I would have bear the horn to me. Skegjold and Skogul, Hildr and Thrudr, Lok and Herfjotur, Gol and Geróð, Randgríðr, Rathgríðr, and Regenleaf. These bear the Einherjar ale. These are called Valkyries. Them Odin sends to every battle. They determine men's fairness. Faulkes translates that, allotted death to the men, and award victory. Grúðr and Rota, and the youngest Norn, who is called Skuld, ride ever to take the slain and decide fights. So in this we have the connection to Odin, the bearing of drinks, the deciding of fights, as well as the inclusion of Skuld. I'm going to take a pause for a minute to dissect this very last line. Ride ever to take the slain and decide fights. As far as I could find, this is absolutely the only place where there is a possibility of seeing the Valkyries as carrying or taking the slain to Valhalla. I think this psychopompic aspect, the like moving between worlds, the carrying of the fallen slain to the afterlife, is something that gets vastly over-exaggerated. And in this, it's a very small distinction. It says, ride ever to take the slain and decide fights. Now, comparing to the Faulkes translation, Faulkes translates it as, always ride to choose who will be slain and govern the killings. So the Brodeur translation says, rides ever to take the slain. I think Brodeur's translation of taking the slain is maybe the only little seed for that psychopompic aspect, and it is translated in a different way by Faulkes, saying always ride to choose who will be slain and govern the killings, not taking the slain to another place, but taking as in deciding who is slain, which coincides with all of the other attestations. So we'll leave that there. Next, we have a short one from Gylfaginning, chapter 49, Prose Brodeur translation, of the Valkyries appearing at Baldr's death. People of many races visited this burning. First is to be told of Odin, how Frigg and the Valkyries went with him and his ravens. So, another connection to Odin. Next, we get an example of Odin sending 2 Valkyries to choose among kings who would come to dwell with him in Valhall. This comes from the Saga of Hákon the Good, chapter 32 in Heimskringla, translated by Finlay and Faulkes. Gondel and Skogul. Gautir sent to choose among kings which of Yngvi's race was to go with Odin and dwell in Valhall. Gondel translates as wand wielder. Skogul translates as shaker. Those are the 2 Valkyries. Gautir is another name for Odin. So Gondel and Skogul, Gautir sent to choose among kings which of Yngvi's race was to go with Odin and dwell in Valhall. Skipping to stanza 8. Redness blended under the rim's heaven. Skogul's storm battered clouds of the shield rims. Spear waves thundered in storm of Odin. Many men sank in the sword's current. When the swords unsheathed sat the princes with shields broken and battered armor. That host was not in good heart going the way to Valhall. Gondel said this, on spear shaft leaning. The gods have gained forces now that Hákon, his great host with him home they have bidden. The war leader heard the words of the Valkyries, mighty, horse-mounted. They showed their wisdom wearing helmets, sitting, and held their shields before them. Why did you settle, said Hákon, the war thus, spear Skogul? We are worthy of gain from the gods. We are the cause, said Skogul, that you won the field and your foemen fled. We must ride now, said the mighty Skogul, the green lands of the gods, to say to Odin that a king is coming to see him in person. Our next attestation sees a repetition of this before moving on to several other references by Snorri to previous poets. So Skaldskaparmál, chapter 9, or chapter 2 in the Fulk's translation, Prose Brodeur translation. This is under kennings for Odin. Gondel and Skogul, Gautir sent to choose from kings who of Yngvi's race should go with Odin and be in Valhall. Then sang Ulfr Uggason. There, I think, the Valkyries follow, and ravens, victorious Odin, to the blood of holy Baldr. With old tales the hall was painted. This is said in Eiríksmál. What dream is that, quoth Odin? I thought to rise ere daybreak, to make Valhall ready for the troops of slain. I roused the champions, bade them rise swiftly, benches to strew, to wash beer flagons, the Valkyries, to pour wine, as a prince were coming. So the first passage there was clearly a reference to the saga of Hákon the Good that was read previously. The second small passage I feel like is a reference to the death of Baldr. And the third reference is connecting to Eiríksmál, which is the story of Eirik Bloodaxe, a poem commissioned for Queen Gunnhild. And that is pretty much it for the attestations connecting the Valkyries with Odin. We get a brief mention here as we move into the kennings, and there's another mention in Hrafnsmál later as we move into more of the romantic stories, so to speak, but that is the majority of connections between Odin and the Valkyries. This next part is concerning kennings. The first attestation comes from Skuld, chapter 60 or 48 in the Faulkes translation, Prose Edda, Brodeur translation, and this is kennings for battle. How should battle be paraphrased? By calling it storm of weapons, or of sheltering shields, or of Odin, or Valkyries, or of host kings and din and clashing. So, small clarification real quick if we're not familiar with kennings. In this case, these are poetic ways to refer to battles. So the names of different Valkyries will be listed in these following kennings as ways of describing battle itself. So it's not necessarily saying like those Valkyries were there in like a personal way, more of a poetic way to describe something as evocative as battle. Thus sang Hornclothi, the king hath held a spear storm with heroes, where the eagles screamed at the din of Skogul. The red wounds spat out blood. Thus sang Eyvindr, and that hero at Har's tempest wore a sark of grey wolfskin. Thus sang Bersi. In earlier days I seemed not to Gunn's war bushes useful in the sleet of Hlokk. When younger we were, so 'tis said. Thus sang Einar. The stark prince lets Hildr's shield sails take the sternest crashing storm wind of the Valkyrs, where hail of bow strings drives the sword blade hammers. And again, 'neath eagle's claws the king's foes sank at the clash of Gondul. Moving now to Skuld, chapter 61 in the Brodeur translation or 49 in the Faulkes translation, Prose Edda. This is Brodeur translating different kennings for weapons and armor. Thus sang Einar, helm folded, strife bold buoy, who from the south went forth into Gunn's crash, and din swift Sigvaldi offered battle. Shields are called tents of Hlokk. Hlokk's tent risers held their noses together, and the heroes of the rainstorm of Hildr's shield wall hewed at each other's beards. Wall of Hildr, as Grettir sang, and we have written before. Blade of Hrungnir's foot soles, as Bragi sang. Wilt hear, O Hrafnketil, how I shall praise the soul blade of Thrudr's thief, stain covered with skill, and praise my king. Bragi, the skald, sang this concerning the ring on the shield. Unless it be that Sigurd's renowned son would have payment in good kind for the ring nave of the ringing wheel of Hildr. He called the shield wheel of Hildr, and the ring the nave of the wheel. Arrows are called hail of the bow or bowstring, and of the shelters or of battle. The hammering king of swords shook from the sails of Hlokk the bow hail, Bravely the wolf's supporter warded his life in battle. I absolutely love the poetic flow of this. The Brodeur translation is fantastic if we want a slightly more literal interpretation, maybe a little more easily digestible. I would recommend the Anthony Faulkes translation. Again, there are many other kennings throughout here in these descriptions of kenning, so many different things refer to other things, but as one starts to learn what these different kennings represent, it all starts to come together and flesh out this very poetic imagery. But that is enough kennings for now. Let's move on to a little more narrative flow to help the brain a bit. All right, I took a little break to turn my heater on for a while, warm up the room, drink some coffee, and let us now move on to our next topic. So this one is an attestation connecting Valkyries with understanding the speech of birds. Now in Volsunga Saga, we get the hero Sigurd tasting the blood of the heart of a dragon and gaining the ability to understand the speech of birds. And in this attestation from Hrafnsmál, which is a piece of skaldic poetry, this one translated by Robert Fulk in 2012, we hear of a Valkyrie conversing with a raven about the deeds of Harald Fairhair, the son of Halfdan. I shall recount the words that I heard a white, bright-haired girl utter when she spoke with a raven. The Valkyrie thought herself wise. Men were not pleasing to the aggressive maid who understood the voice of birds. The white-throated and bright-eyelashed one greeted the skull-pricker of Hymir, which sat on the edge of a cliff. And the rest of the piece is a conversation between the two of them, the raven recounting the deeds of Harald Fairhair, but in this instance we see a physical description of a Valkyrie, as well as her ability to converse with and understand the speech of birds. Next up, we have the topic of Valkyries in connection with weaving. This is one of my all-time favorite passages. I even painted a picture of this scene on an old vintage sewing machine that I got from an antique store a while ago. I thought it was fun because the sewing machine, again, connected to thread, to weaving, this passage connected to weaving. So this one comes from Dardaroljoð in Njál's Saga, translated by Pierre Chantepé, 1902, usually said as the Song of the Spear. So Dorod follows or sees some women entering a building, goes to look through and sees these women singing and weaving on a loom, and this is the song that they sang. Blood rains from the cloudy web on the broad loom of slaughter. The web of man, gray as armor, is now being woven. The Valkyries will cross it with a crimson weft. The warp is made of human entrails. Human heads are used as heddle weights. The heddle rods are blood-wet spears. The shafts are iron-bound, and the arrows are shuttles. With swords we will weave this web of battle. The Valkyries go on weaving with swords drawn, Hild and Hjörthrimul, Sangrid and Svipul, Spears will shatter, shields will splinter, swords will gnaw like wolves through armor. Let us now wind the web of war, which the young king once waged. Let us advance and wade through the ranks, where friends of ours are exchanging blows. Let us now wind the web of war, and then follow the king to battle. Gun and Gondel can see there the blood-spattered shields that guarded the king. Let us now wind the web of war, where the warrior banners are forging forward. Let his life not be taken, only the Valkyries can choose the slain. Lands will be ruled by new peoples who once inhabited outlying headlands. We pronounce a great king destined to die. Now an earl is felled by spears. The men of Ireland will suffer a grief that will never grow old in the minds of men. The web is now woven and the battlefield reddened. The news of disaster will spread through lands. It is horrible now to look around as a blood-red cloud darkens the sky. The heavens are stained with the blood of men as the Valkyries sing their song. We sang well victory songs for the young king. Hail to our singing. Let him who listens to our Valkyrie song learn it well and tell it to others. Let us ride on horses, hard on bare backs, with swords unsheathed, away from here. And then they tore the woven cloth from the loom and ripped it to pieces, each keeping the shred she held in her hands. The women mounted their horses and rode away, 6 to the south and 6 to the north. Wow, okay. I have to sit with that one for a second. I feel like that one has a lot of power. Just in reading through that, I was feeling this crazy energy start to like build up in me. So it feels like there's definitely some power in that song. I think it's interesting, one of the last lines, let him who listens to our Valkyrie song learn it well and tell it to others. I would absolutely love to have this song memorized at some point, either in English or in the original language. But as a prayer or as an invocation or just a way to connect with the energy of the Valkyries in general. One of my absolute favorites. Next, we have a brief passage by Snorri speaking of women metaphorically as Valkyries. So it's called Skaparmál 39, 31 in the Faulkes translation, Prose Edda, translated by Brodeur. Woman is also metaphorically called by the names of the Asyniur, or the Valkyries, or Noris, or women of supernatural kind. So in this next section, as we move more into romance-based stories, we see certain daughters of kings being named as Valkyries. And these daughters of kings may take human lovers, but they also possess the abilities of riding over the air and the sea and choosing who falls in battle. Now, the human parentage, the mortal lovers, and the poetic metaphorical reference to women as Valkyries stand in some contrast to their qualities of flight and control of battles. For me, this brings back the idea that we shouldn't be too hasty to categorize or try to label the Valkyries as like spiritual beings or humans speaking only metaphorically, or even the idea that Valkyrie may just be a role that one can undertake in life and even like fulfill while living and simultaneously in the afterlife. I think there's so many different attestations and different points of view that it's more important to just look at these stories and look at the qualities that they represent and not try to fit the Valkyries into like one specific label, category, or box. Now we begin the section of romance between Valkyrie and man. The section of romantic relation will take us all the way through the end of the episode, but we get so much more than just romance. We get a lot of references to their various qualities. We get to see a little more in depth the character of these people categorized or spoken of as Valkyries. So the first attestation that we're going to read from comes from Volundarkvida, the introduction through stanza 5. This is found in the Poetic Edda, Bellows translation. And in this passage, we will see Valkyries as daughters of kings. We will see what I think is the only mention of Valkyries' swan garments. We also see another connection to spinning. We get their connection to human lovers, as well as description of flight to battle. There were 3 brothers, sons of a king of the Finns. One was called Slagvith, another Egil, the third Volund. They went on snowshoes and hunted wild beasts. They came into Uftalir, and there they built themselves a house. There was a lake there, which is called Ulfsjar. Early one morning, they found on the shore of the lake 3 women who were spinning flax. Near them were their swan garments, for they were Valkyries. 2 of them were the daughters of King Hrothgar, Hladguð the Swan-White, and Hervor the All-Wise. And the third was Olrun, daughter of Kjar from Valand. These did they bring home to their hall with them. Egil took Olrun, and Slagvith Swan-White, and Volund All-Wise. There they dwelt 7 winters, but then they flew away to find battles and came back no more. Then Egil sent forth on his snowshoes to follow Olrun, and Slagvith followed Swan-White, but Volund stayed in Ulftalir. He was a most skillful man, as men know from old tales. Maids from the south through Mirkwood flew, fair and young their fate to follow. On the shore of the sea to rest them they sat, the maids of the south, and flax they spun. Hladguð and Hervor, Hrothgar's children, and Olrun the wise, Kjar's daughter was. In her arms took Egil then, to her bosom white the woman fair, Swan-White second, swan feathers she wore. And her arms the third of the sisters threw, next round Volund's neck so white. There did they sit for 7 winters. In the 8th at last came their longing again, and in the 9th did need divide them. The maidens yearned for the murky wood, the fair young maids their fate to follow. Next we have the story of Svava the Valkyrie and Helgi the hero. This comes from Helgakvida Hjörvarðssonar, various stanzas. I will have them all listed in the show notes, and this is from the Poetic Edda Bellows translation. Hjörvarð and Sigurlin had a son, mighty, and of noble stature. He was a silent man, and no name stuck fast to him. He sat on a hill and saw 9 Valkyries riding. One of them was the fairest of all. She spake, "Late wilt thou, Helgi, have hoard of rings, thou battle tree fierce, or of shining fields. The eagle screams soon. If never thou speakest, though hero, hard thy heart may cry." Helgi spake, "What gift shall I have with Helgi's name, glorious maid, for the giving is thine? All thy words shall I think on well, but I want them not, if I win not thee." The Valkyries spake, "Swords I know lying in Sigurdsholm, 50 there are, save only 4. One there is that is best of all, the shield destroyer, with gold it shines. In the hilt is fame, in the heft is courage, in the point is fear for its owner's foes. On the blade there lies a blood-flecked snake, and a serpent's tail round the flat is twisted." Eylimi was the name of a king whose daughter was Svava. She was a Valkyrie, and rode air and sea. She gave Helgi this name, and shielded him oft thereafter in battle. Skipping ahead a little ways, we have the fighting between Helgi and Hrimgerth, who I believe is a troll woman. I need to find the original word for that to clarify a little bit. But anyway, they are preparing for battle, and this is some fighting going back and forth, and it speaks of the Valkyrie again there. Starting at stanza 26. Hrimgerth spake, "More thou lovest her who scanned the harbor last night among the men. The gold-decked maid bore magic, methinks, when the land from the sea she sought, and fast she kept your fleet. She alone is to blame, that I may not bring death to the monarch's men." Helgi spake, "Hrimgerth, mark, if thy hurts I requite, now tell the truth to the king. Was there one who the ships of the warrior warded, or did many go together?" Hrimgerth spake, "Thrice 9 there were, but one rode first. A helmed maid, white of hue, their horses quivered. There came from their manes dew in the dales so deep. Hail on the woods so high, thence men their harvests have, but ill was the sight I saw." So if it didn't quite come across in this translation, Hrimgerth is saying there were thrice 9 or 27 Valkyries riding that protected the fleet or the ships of Helgi, and it was because of them that Hrimgerth couldn't sink Helgi's ships. They continue fighting from there until the sun comes up and Hrimgerth is turned to stone. We pick up then with, "King Helgi was a mighty warrior. He came to King Eylimi and sought the hand of his daughter Svava. Then Helgi and Svava exchanged vows, and greatly they loved each other. Svava was at home with her father, while Helgi was in the field. Svava was still a Valkyrie as before." Summarizing this next part briefly, Helgi's brother Héðinn vows to have Svava as his own, and then repents and travels to tell Helgi of his folly. Helgi says not to repent, for he has a duel with a prince in 3 nights' time and doubts whether he will survive. He is then mortally wounded in the battle and sends someone to tell Svava. Svava, hearing of Helgi's imminent death, spake. What chanced with Helgi, Hjörvar's son? Hard to me is harm now come if the sea smote him or sword bit him. Ill shall I bring to all his foes. She then goes out to meet him. Skipping ahead, Helgi spake. I bid thee, Svava, weep not, bride, if thou wilt hearken to these my words. The bed for haven have thou ready, and yield thy love to the young hero. Svava spake. A vow I had in my dear loved home, when Helgi sought with rings to have me, that not of my will, if the warrior died, would I fold in the arms of a man unfamed. And that ends. There's this very small prose section at the end that says, of Helgi and Svava, it is said they were born again. Larrington translates that as reincarnated. And in this next instance, we will see such reincarnation. Now we have the story of the Valkyrie Sigrun and the hero Helgi, a different Helgi than the last Helgi. This one comes from Helgakvida Hundingsbana 1. Various stanzas. Again, all the stanzas are listed in the show notes. This is found in the Poetic Edda, Bellows translation. There are a few sections I have translated from Larrington, and I will mention them when we come across them. We begin with a little scene setting around this Helgi after a battle. The king then sat when he had slain Eyjolf and Alf neath the eagle stone. Jorvarth and Hovarth, Hunding's sons, the kin of the spear wielder, all had he killed. Then glittered light from Logafjol, and from the light the flashes leaped. High under helms on heaven's field, their burnies all with blood were red, and from their spears the sparks flew forth. Early then in Wolfwood asked the mighty king of the southern maid if the hero home would she come that night. The weapons clashed. Down from her horse sprang Hogni's daughter. The shields were still, and spake to the hero. Other tasks are ours, methinks, than drinking beer with the breaker of rings. My father has pledged his daughter fair as bride to Granmar's son so grim. But Helgi, I, once Hothbrod called as a fine king as the son of a cat. Yet the hero will come a few nights hence. Unless thou dost bid him the battleground seek, or takest the maid from the warrior mighty. Helgi spake. Fear him not, though Isung he felled. First must our courage keen be tried, before unwilling thou fare with the knave. Weapons will clash, if to death I come not. So here we see Helgi after the battle, who sees Valkyries riding. One of them, Sigrun, comes off her horse, and Helgi invites her to come home with him, or to feast and drink with him, etc. And she says she has other things to do, and then proceeds to tell that she has been promised to marry against her will someone, and kind of inspires Helgi to fight on her behalf, and he willingly says that he will do so. Skipping ahead then a bit, we get Sigrun guarding Helgi and his ships in a storm. Very similar to the actions of Svava in the last story that we read. So this picks up with stanza 27. There was a beat of oars and clash of iron, shield smote shield, and the ship's folk rowed. Swiftly went the warrior-laden fleet of the ruler forth from land. So did it sound when together the sisters of Kolga struck with the keels full long, as if cliffs were broken with beating surf. Helgi bade higher hoist the sails, nor did the ship's folk shun the waves, though dreadfully did Aegir's daughters seek the steeds of the sea to sink. But from above did Sigrun brave aid the men and all their faring. Mightily came from the claws of Ran the leader's sea beast off Gnipalund. And there are a lot of parallels between these stories. So this next one is, again, a little bit of flighting. And in this one, Sinfjotli, who is the companion of this story's Helgi, is flighting with Guthmund and calls her a Valkyrie, or mentions Valkyries in connection with his accusation of Guthmund. So this is Sinfjotli talking to Guthmund about Guthmund, not in reference to Svava. I'm going to read the Bellows and the Larrington translation to get a little bit of context here, or just different translations. So Bellows, a Valkyrie wast thou, loathly witch, evil and base, in all father's home. The warriors all must ever fight, woman subtle, for sake of thee. Larrington translation. You were, you harmful creature, a witch, horrible, unnatural, among Odin's Valkyries. All the Einherjar had to fight headstrong woman on your account. One of my friends has made a connection between this stanza and the story of Gullveig in stanzas 21 and 22 of Voluspa. It's kind of outside of the scope of this episode, but I'm just going to drop that little possible connection between Guthmund, or at least the accusation by Sinfjotli of Guthmund, and the story of Gullveig as presented in Voluspa. So we get back to the main storyline, skip ahead a little bit, and this is at the end of the battle after Helgi has fought the man to whom Sigrun was to be married. Picking up around stanza 54. Ever was Helgi Hunding's slayer first in the throng where warriors fought. Fierce in battle, slow to fly, hard the heart of the hero was. Jumping to a Larrington translation of this stanza 54. Helmeted Valkyries came down from the sky. The noise of spears grew loud. They protected the prince. Then said Sigrun, the wound-giving Valkyrie flew. The troll woman's mount was feasting on the fodder of ravens. Back to Bellows for stanza 55. Hail to thee, hero, full happy with men. Offspring of Yngvi shalt ever live. For thou the fearless foe hast slain, who to many the dread of death had brought. Warrior well for thyself hast won, red rings bright and the noble bride. Both now, warrior, thine shall be. Hogni's daughter, and Hringstathir. Wealth and triumph. The battle now wanes. So, a little breakdown real quick. Helgi is doing great, being a fearless hero. And then Valkyries come down from the sky. The sound of battle is super loud. There is Sigrun. Valkyries are flying around. The troll woman's mount, aka Wolf, was feasting on the fodder of ravens. Fodder of ravens being corpses, so wolves were eating the corpses. And then she's like, hello, Helgi, you have been super fearless and won the battle, and you have won me as your bride, as well as these lands. Congratulations. The battle's over. But that's not the end of the story. We have a whole nother poem, Helga Kvidda Hundingsbana 2, that kind of continues the story of Sigrun and this Helgi. There's a little bit of like what happened before, and then some mention of what happened in Hundingsbana or Helga Kvidda Hundingsbana 1, and then it kind of continues on to the story afterwards. So Helga Kvidda Hundingsbana 2 from the Poetic Edda. So many stanzas, again, in the show notes. Bellows translation, there are some mentions from Larrington. I will again mention those as they come up. So still the story of the Valkyries Sigrun and Helgi. It begins, though, before their meeting, when Helgi is spying on King Hunding with the intention of killing King Hunding. There's some things become suspect. They're looking for Helgi, and Helgi disguises himself in a bondswoman's clothes and sets to work like grinding on a millstone. And his foster father is there and kind of interacts with the person who comes seeking Helgi. And this guy's like, your slave woman has super fierce eyes, and I feel like the millstone is going to break and the ports are going to be shattered because she's so strong. What's up with that? Stanza 4. Hagal answered and said, small is the wonder if boards are splintered by a monarch's daughter, the mill is turned. Once through clouds she was wont to ride, and battles fought like fighting men, till Helgi a captive held her fast. Sister she is of Sigurd and Hogni. Thus bright are the eyes of the Ylfing's maid. So basically, Hagal is like, she is super fierce and strong because she's a Valkyrie. Duh. Continuing on. Helgi escaped and went to a fighting ship. He slew King Hunding, and thenceforth was called Helgi Hundingsbane. He lay with his host in Brungavanger, and they had there a strand slaughtering and ate the raw flesh. Hogni was the name of a king. His daughter was Sigrun. She was a Valkyrie and rode air and water. She was Svava, reborn. Sigrun rode to Helgi's ship and said, who rules the ship by the shore so steep? Where is the home ye warriors have? Why do ye bide in Brunavanger? Or what the way that ye wish to try? Helgi spake. Hamal's the ship by the shore so steep, our home in Hlessi do we have, for fair wind bid we in Brunavanger. Eastward the way that we wish to try. Sigrun spake. Where hast thou, warrior, battle wakened, or gorged the birds of the sisters of Guth? Why is thy byrnie spattered with blood? Why, helmed, dost feast on food uncooked? Helgi spake. Latest of all the Ylfing's son on the western sea, if know thou wilt, captured bears in Bragalund, and fed the eagles with the edge of sword. Now it is shown why our shirts are bloody, and little our food with fire is cooked. Sigrun spake. Of battle thou tellest, and there was bent Hunding the king before Helgi down. There was carnage when thou didst avenge thy kin, and blood flowed fast on the blade of the sword. Helgi spake. How didst thou know that now our kin maiden wise we have well avenged? Many there are of the sons of the mighty who share alike our lofty race. Sigrun spake. Not far was I from the lord of the folk yestermorn, when the monarch was slain. Though crafty the son of Sigurd methinks when he speaks of the fight in slaughter runes. On the long ship once I saw thee well, when in the blood-stained bow thou wast, and round thee icy waves were raging. Now would the hero hide from me, but to Hogni's daughter, Helgi is known. So after Helgi and his troops slay King Hunding, they go back to their ship. Their burnies, or like chainmail, are all bloody. They still have their helmets on. They're eating raw flesh. And then the Valkyrie Sigrun comes down and is like, what's the name of your ship? Why are you here? Why are you so bloody? Why are you eating raw flesh? And Helgi speaks in riddles, tells some lies, and Sigrun sees right through it. She's like, no, I'm pretty sure you're actually Helgi, and this is what you were doing. And he's like, whoa, how'd you know that? And she was like, well, I was there. It's smart. It's smart that you're not telling everything to a total stranger, disguising some of your deeds and your identity and whatnot. But no, I know you. I kind of think of that meeting as their like first little flirtation, maybe where Sigrun takes a little more interest in Helgi, because next we see Granmar was the name of a mighty king. He had many sons. One was named Hodbrod. Hodbrod was in a king's meeting, and he won the promise of having Sigrun, Hogni's daughter, for his wife. But when she heard this, she rode with the Valkyries over air and sea to seek Helgi. Helgi was then at Logafjol, and he had fought with Hunding's sons. He was all weary with battle, and he sat under the eagle stone. There Sigrun found him, and ran to throw her arms around his neck, and kissed him, and told him her tidings, as is set forth in the old Volsunga lay. Sigrun the joyful chieftain sought. Forthwith Helgi's hand she took. She greeted the hero, helmed, and kissed him. The warrior's heart to the woman turned. From her heart the daughter of Hogni spake. Dear was Helgi, she said to her. Sigrun spake. At the meeting to Hodbrod mated I was, but another hero I fain would have, though, king, the wrath of my kin I fear, since I broke my father's fairest wish. Long with all my heart I loved Sigmund's son, ere ever I saw him. Helgi spake. Fear not ever Hogni's anger, nor yet thy kinsman's cruel wrath. Maiden, thou with me shalt live. Thy kindred, fair one, I shall not fear. Helgi then assembled a great sea host and went to Frekastin. On the sea he met a perilous storm. Lightning flashed overhead, and the bolts struck the ship. They saw in the air that 9 Valkyries were riding, and recognized Sigrun among them. Then the storm abated, and they came safe and sound to land. So that passage is kind of where Helga Kvidda Hundingsbana 1 began, with Sigrun riding out to meet Helgi, telling of her marriage to someone she would not marry, and then him offering to fight for her. So we get a little bit of a repetition in this case of the storm at sea and Sigrun as Valkyrie riding through the storm and protecting. We will go ahead and skip the long flighting bit. It's actually not that long, it's just a few stanzas. But we'll go ahead and skip that. There was a great battle, and all Granmar's sons were slain, and all their allies. Only Dag, Hogni's son, was spared, and he swore loyalty to the Volsungs. Remember that name, remember Dag. Sigrun went among the dead and found Hothbrod at the coming of death. She said, "Never shall Sigrun from Sevafjol, Hothbrod king, be held in thine arms. Granmar's son, full cold have grown, and the giant steeds grey on corpses gorge." Then she sought out Helgi and was full of joy. He said, "Maid, not fair is all thy fortune. The Norns I blame, that this should be. This morn there fell at Frekastin Bragi and Hogni beneath my hand. On the ground full low the slain are lying. Most are there of the race of the men of thy race. Naught hast thou won, for thy fate it was brave men to bring to the battlefield." Then Sigrun wept. Helgi said, "Grieve not, Sigrun, the battle is gained. The fighter can shun not his fate." Sigrun spake, "To life would I call them who slaughtered lie, if safe on thy breast I might be." Helgi took Sigrun to wife, and they had sons. So in modern summary, giant big battle. Helgi ends up pretty much winning the battle, but a ton of people die. Sigrun's brother Dag is spared. Then Sigrun runs over to Hothbrod, the guy that she was supposed to marry, and is like, "Ha ha ha, nope, never will I be held in your arms. All of your brothers are dead, and the wolves are eating all the corpses." And then she is joyful and goes over to Helgi. Helgi's like, "I don't know if this is quite as good as you think it is. In this battle, many of your kinsmen, including your father, died beneath my hand." He says to Sigrun, "It was your fate to bring people to the battlefield, but do not cry, for a fighter cannot shun his fate." Super big romantic. Then they get married and have sons. The storyline from there kind of jumps forward a bit, though not a ton. It picks up with Helgi did not reach old age. Dag, the son of Hogni, offered sacrifice to Odin to be avenged for his father's death. Odin gave Dag his spear. Dag found Helgi, his brother-in-law, at the place which is called Fjotorlund. He thrust the spear through Helgi's body. Then Helgi fell, and Dag rode to Sevafjord and told Sigrun the tidings. Sad am I, sister, sorrow to tell thee. Woe to my kin, unwilling I worked. In the morn there fell at Fjotorlund the noblest prince the world has known. And his heel he set on the heroes' necks. Switching now to the Larrington translation for ease of flow. This is Larrington, stanzas 31 through 33. Sigrun then spake. May all the oaths which you swore to Helgi rebound upon you by the bright water of Lift and the cool and watery stone of Un. May the ship you sail on not go forward, though the wind you need has sprung up behind. May the horse you ride on not go forward, though your enemies are about to catch you. May the sword that you wield never bite for you unless it's whistling above your own head. The death of Helgi would be avenged on you if you were a wolf out in the forest with nothing of your own and deprived of happiness, if you had no food except when you glutted yourself on corpses. Back to the Bellows translation. Dag then spake. Mad art thou, sister, and wild of mind, such a curse on thy brother to cast? Odin is ruler of every ill, who sunders kin with runes of spite. Thy brother rings so red will give thee. All Vandalsve and Vigdalir take half my land to pay the harm, ring-decked maid, and as meed for thy sons. Sigrun spake. I shall not sit happy at Sevafjord, early or late, my love to life, if the light cannot show on the leader's band. Vigdalir, bearing him back to his home, the gold-bitted, I shall greet him never. Such the fear that Helgi's foes ever felt, and all their kin, as makes the goats with terror mad run from the wolf among the rocks. Helgi rose above heroes all, like the lofty ash above lowly thorns, or the noble stag with dew besprinkled, bearing his head above all beasts, and his horns gleam bright to heaven itself. Concerning now Helgi's burial and visitation. A hill was made in Helgi's memory, and when he came to Valhall, then Odin bade him rule over everything with himself. Skipping ahead a teeny bit. One of Sigrun's maidens went one evening to Helgi's hill and saw that Helgi rode to the hill with many men. The maiden said, Is this a dream that methinks I see, or the doom of the gods that dead men ride, and hither spurring urge their steeds, or is homecoming now to the heroes granted? Helgi spake, No dream is this, that thou thinkest to see, nor end of the world, though us thou beholdest, and hither spurring we urge our steeds, nor is homecoming now to the heroes granted. The maiden went home and said to Sigrun, Go forth, Sigrun, from Sevafjord, if fain the lord of the folk wouldst find. The hill is open, Helgi is come. The sword tracks bleed, the monarch bade that thou his wounds shouldst now make well. Sigrun went to the hill. Sigrun went in the hill to Helgi and said, "Now am I glad of our meeting together as Odin's hawks so eager for prey, when slaughter and flesh all warm they scent, or dew-wet sea the red of day. First will I kiss the lifeless king, ere off the bloody byrnie thou cast. With frost thy hair is heavy, Helgi, and damp thou art with the dew of death. Ice-cold hands has Hogni's kinsman. What, prince, can I to bring thee ease?" Helgi spake, "Thou alone, Sigrun of Sevafjol, art cause that Helgi with dew is heavy. Gold-decked maid, thy tears are grievous, each falls like blood on the hero's breast. Well shall we drink a noble draught, though love and lands are lost to me. No man a song of sorrow shall sing, though bleeding wounds are on my breast. Now in the hill our brides we behold, the heroes' loves by their husbands dead. Sigrun made ready a bed in the hill. Here a bed I have made for thee, Helgi, to rest thee from care. Thou kin of the Ylfings, I will make thee sink to sleep in my arms, as once I lay with the living king." Then Helgi and his followers rode on their way, and the women went home to the dwelling. Another evening, Sigrun bade the maiden keep watch at the hill, and at sunset, when Sigrun came to the hill, she said, "Now were he come, if come he might, Sigmund's son from Odin's seat, hope grows dim of the hero's return, when eagles sit on the ash tree boughs, and men are seeking the meeting of dreams." The maiden said, "Mad thou wouldst seem alone to seek, daughter of heroes, the house of the dead. For mightier now at night are all the ghosts of the dead than when day is bright." Sigrun was early dead of sorrow and grief. It was believed in olden times that people were born again, but that is now called old wives' folly. Of Helgi and Sigrun, it is said that they were born again. He became Helgi, and she, Kara, the daughter of Halfdan, as is told in the Lay of Kara, and she was a Valkyrie. So there concludes the story of Sigrun and Helgi, and mention of yet another incarnation. So we have this triple, born again couple, starting with Svava and Helgi Hjörvarðssonar, reincarnated then as Sigrun and Helgi Hundingsvana, reincarnated again as Kara and Helgi something other fancy last name, Handingjaskati. There are so many observations one could make about this reincarnated or born again couple of the war hero and the Valkyrie. So many things pointed to in these stories. For sake of time, I'm going to proceed to our last romantic couple, and leave the observations and dot connecting up to you. All right, finally, we have the famous Valkyrie Sigurdrifa, aka Brynhild, and the hero Sigurd. We're going to start with a little bit of a preface, I guess, in Hrafnsmál stanzas 42 to 44. of the Poetic Edda Bellows translation. So this is taking place after Sigurd kills the dragon. Fafnir tastes the dragon's blood, gains the ability to hear bird speech. Another bird spake, "A hall stands high on Hinderfjall, all with flame it is ringed without. Warriors wise did make it once out of flaming light of the flood. On the mountain sleeps a battle maid, and about her plays the bane of the wood. Ig with the thorn hath smitten her thus, for she felt the fighter he fain would save. There mayst thou the maiden helmed, who forth on Vingskonir rode from the fight, the victory bringer. Her sleep shall break not. Thou hero's son, so the Norns have set." So this bird's like, hey, Sigurd, there is this battle maid in this hall that is surrounded by fire. You should go to her. So Fafnismál then directly tees into Sigurdrifamal. And I'm just going to read intro through stanza 5, Poetic Edda, Bellows translation, The Waking of the Valkyrie. Sigurd rode up on Hinderfjall and turned southward toward the land of the Franks. On the mountain he saw a great light as if fire were burning, and the glow reached up to heaven. And when he came thither, there stood a tower of shields, and above it a banner. Sigurd went into the shield tower and saw that a man lay there sleeping with all his war weapons. First he took the helm from off his head, and then he saw that it was a woman. The mail coat was as fast as if it had grown to the flesh. Then he cut the mail coat from the head opening downward and out to both the armholes. Then he took the mail coat from her, and she awoke and sat up and saw Sigurd and said, "What bit through the byrnie? How was broken my sleep? Who made me free of the fetters pale?" He answered, "Sigmund's son, with Sigurd's sword, that late with flesh hath fed the ravens." Sigurd sat beside her and asked her name. She took a horn full of mead and gave him a memory draught. Hail day, hail sons of day, and night and her daughter now. Look on us here with loving eyes, that waiting we victory win. Hail to the gods, ye goddesses, hail, and all the generous earth. Give to us wisdom and goodly speech and healing hands lifelong. Long did I sleep, my slumber was long, and long are the griefs of life. Odin decreed that I could not break the heavy spells of sleep. Her name was Sigurdrifa, and she was a Valkyrie. She said that 2 kings fought in battle. One was called Hjálmgunnar, an old man but a mighty warrior, and Odin had promised him the victory. And the other was Agnar, brother of Autha. None he found who fain would shield him. Sigurdrifa slew Hjálmgunnar in battle, and Odin pricked her with a sleep thorn in punishment for this, and said that she should never thereafter win victory in battle, and that she should be wedded. And I said to him that I had made a vow in my turn that I would never marry a man who knew the meaning of fear. Sigurd answered and asked her to teach him wisdom, if she knew what took place in all the worlds. This is followed by 15 or so stanzas of Sigurdrifa's advice on the runes and another 15 stanzas of Sigurdrifa's just general life advice. Popping over to the Prose Edda real quick, Skaldskaparmál, chapter 48, 41 in the Faulkes translation. This is Brodeur's translation. In this we get Snorri's take on Sigurdrifa. So it says, Then Sigurd rode on till he found a house on the mountain wherein a woman in helm and byrnie lay sleeping. He drew his sword and cut the byrnie from her. She awoke then and gave her name as Hilda. She is called Brynhild, and she was a Valkyrie. As far as I know, this is the most explicit or direct connection between Sigurdrifa and Brynhild. Otherwise, I don't think that equation is made in the rest of the Poetic Edda or in Saga of the Volsungs. Anyway, the connection makes sense to me, but I just wanted to point that out because it is open to interpretation. And for our very last attestation today, we are going to Volsunga Saga, chapter 24, Morris and Magnusson translation. Brynhild answered to Sigurd, It is not fated that we should abide together. I am a shield may, and wear helm on head, even as the kings of war, and them full oft I help. Neither is the battle become loathsome to me. And with that, we come to the end of our episode. In summary, we have seen various attestations of the Valkyries being connected with Odin, with bearing drinks in Valhalla, riding over the air and the sea, being the daughters of kings, deciding the fates of battle, protecting those that they love, weaving the fates of battle, speaking with birds, and so much more. I hope through all of these attestations that maybe something new was brought to mind, that you've found some enjoyment in listening, maybe some connections were made, maybe it gave you some food for thought. But yeah, having all these references collected in one place is definitely useful for me in learning more about them. I hope it has been useful to you. Thank you so much for sticking through this episode with me. I've recently started releasing these episodes on YouTube as well. So you can listen on YouTube or on Spotify. Go ahead and give the show a like, a follow. You can comment, you can share, give it a rating. I can also be reached by email at heathentransgirlpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again so much for listening. Have an absolutely fabulous rest of your day or night, where and whenever you are listening, and I will see you for the next episode. Bye.